beats, baby.
Welcome to Universal Theory, where the goal is to find a common language between the abstract and concrete. We are the unorthodox representation of physics and metaphysics. I'm Jordan.
And I'm Trent.
And together, we are Universal Theory.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Universal Theory. I'm your co-host, Trent, joined as always, Jordan. Let's see if we can get a reaction out of him. How's it going, bro? Oh, yeah? Oh, it's just yeah, okay. He's miming. Let's see. We're playing charades. The merch. Oh, he's in a box. Oh, gender. Oh, yep, got it. Gender. Yep, that's the principle. Great job playing charades over there.
Yep.
Yep, we're on to gender. Welcome, everybody. Last principle. But before we get into that, shout out to Jerome Duffy. That's your handle online. I'm not sure what your alias is, but we appreciate you being down in the comments, being a soldier down there and interacting with us, interacting with each other. Great questions coming from you and great insight into our episodes. On that same note, if there's anybody that's been in the comments that hasn't gotten a shout out by now, please let us know in the comments. Like, hey, Universal Theory, you forgot about me. And we will make sure that we shout you out. We want to make sure that we are interacting with our community and you're getting props for when you are the reason that we are, being recommended to other places because there's activity on our page. Mm-hmm. So we truly do appreciate that. In that same vein, don't forget to like, share, hit the notification bell to make sure that you get notified when we have new episodes or new shorts, and share. Also, so merch, right? Our merch site is up, Universal Threads. You can look and find it through our link tree. It's a great deal. It's a great value for the price. Right now, we are running the Initiate Edition line for the first 50 pieces. And once the first 50 pieces are sold, then we're going to go back to just the original line. So if you're thinking about getting some gear from us, go ahead and shop on our page. We're going to be adding new items in the next couple of days. So by the time you see this, actually, most of the items will probably be on there. And then obviously when summer comes, we'll add some more summer apparel and do different lines and variations. We're definitely trying to have fun with our store. And Patreon, we haven't been super active on there. We will start to really be building out the infrastructure on there. Jordan has some videos that are going to go on there. I have some videos. That's going to be the place where it's more experience of ourself. We'll be able to build on things that aren't necessarily completely data-driven. So that's where we'll really be able to get into some of the nitty-gritty of questions you might have, or if you don't feel comfortable on a public platform speaking about certain things that you've experienced, then the Patreon's probably going to be the place for you. Also, it's a place just to come and kick it and get extra content. If you've bought merch, so I know that we need pictures from Caffeine Blank and Ashley. Feel free to just send us some images if you want to send them in you could send them to our email at universaltheory or universal.theory@gmail.com, or you can send them directly to me or Jordan since we know both of you. Now that we've got that out the way, gender. Yeah, we're on to the last principle. After this, we're going to talk about all the principles as one and probably using our logo as an example. And then we might do one more episode about principles. But then we've got some exciting things coming in the future, some interviews and different concepts of podcasts. So stay tuned. But we got to get this one out the way first, and this is probably the scariest principle of all in this day and age, in this PC day and age. But luckily, gender doesn't just apply to biology. Gender is something that we can look at biology to understand it, and then use the principle of correspondence to start to apply it to the world around us. So I think what you want to do is keep in mind that we have the other principles when we're looking at gender. And what I like to picture is the yin and yang. Mm-hmm. Right? The yin and yang is a great symbol to understand masculinity and then having a little bit, right? That little dot inside of the yin and yang would be femininity, and then that little dot of masculinity. And that just means that they exist within each other, right? And they can't exist as a whole without each other. So we see this in biology, but we can use polarity also to understand that gender is a spectrum, right? There's two sides, there's male and there's female, and we see throughout history a spectrum of individuals being born along that pole, even right in the middle, right? So being born with both genitalia. So this confirms, when you're using the principles, that's a way to confirm that these are two sides to the same coin because there is a spectrum between them. And we are going to get into more than just biology in this episode. So if you think that we're just going to dance around biology this whole episode, we've got more in store for you. So gender is one of those. Gender is one of those ones where we're definitely going to touch on the biological aspect, but let's start out with something that isn't quite so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When we talk about gender, like he said, we're not talking strictly about biology because biology is a manifestation of the principle of gender. And like he said, in the yin and yang symbol, you have both masculine and feminine polarity or gender. And it's on a spectrum because they, like he said once again, they cannot exist as a whole independent of each other.
Right.
So you have to have the masculine technically is feminine and the feminine is masculine and they are the same thing. Back to the circle and the dot and the circumpunct and the ring and the rod. These are masculine and feminine polarities. And one would say that, from the standpoint of the wave, we could say that it's masculine and it stimulates or it fulfills the purpose of the particle.
Right.
But then you could also say that the wave is feminine and the particle is masculine. And then if we go to the ring and the rod, well, obviously one looks like a womb or it's circular, ova, or, it's a conceivable mechanism. And then the other one is a projecting mechanism where it's like a phallus. It's a ruler or, an extension of the male principle. But not entirely in that way. Because you can see the ruler also is feminine because within it has feminine properties. Everything within it conceives.
Yeah, that's how I used to see it, and I still can. You look at the circle as this potential or as this ability, this motion, and then the dot, which is our infinity, is like concrete, it's matter, it's Mother Earth. So that's kind of how I used to look at it. Then we've had conversations, and it's important to be able, especially with this principle, to be able to look at something and see both, right? You see me as a male, but you still should see feminine qualities, right? So when you're looking at something, you should be able to see, okay, I see this as female, and then its counterpart is male, and I can see that counterpart as female and see that original thing as male. So it's important to be able to do both.
Yes, exactly. And distinguishing what is a male quality versus a female quality, and only because there are predominancies in polarization of the principle of gender.
Yep.
So from a metaphysical sense, we could say that the soul is androgynous or hermaphroditic, and that's why in ancient cultures they had this concept of the divine hermaphrodite.
Yep.
For example, in the Grecian culture, you have Hermes and Aphrodite. Hermaphrodite.
There we go. That's a good way to describe the word. Yep.
Yeah. So, and one is masculine, one is feminine, but the two of them go together as a singularity. And then when it manifests, from the wave to the particle duality, not to say that duality doesn't exist in the higher planes. It's another misnomer. A lot of people are like, well, duality doesn't exist there. It only exists here. It's like duality exists everywhere, but duality is a singularity.
Right.
And it's differentiated and polarized along this spectrum in different ways in different planes. You can consider one plane in relationship to another plane, or one wave in relationship to another wave when they're superimposed. One is the masculine, one is the feminine, even though each wave is an androgynous and it has the peaks and the troughs within it, and you could consider those masculine and feminine as well. It's always an androgynous dynamic.
Yep.
And so when we say masculine quality, we're not saying that the female doesn't possess this quality.
No.
When we say feminine quality, we don't mean that the masculine doesn't possess this quality.
No.
Equal in nature, different in degree.
Yeah.
So we're not going to get into bringing up all the principles at once right now, which would make this conversation way easier.
Yes, it would.
Because we're going to do that later. You know, we have
Yeah.
an episode for that. You know, we have to
Exactly.
string you guys along now, you know, give you this information bit by bit. But when we talk about masculine and feminine, once again, they are always androgynous. And then in the physical realm, we have a polarization of male and female. And then in certain circumstances, you have hermaphroditic or asexual plants. You have asexual minerals. Some minerals have more of a masculine influence than a feminine influence, and they might project a certain frequency onto another, and it's receptive, or the process is masculine and feminine. Same way with animals. You have hermaphroditic animals, and then in the humanoid category, you also have hermaphrodites. Like he said, some are polarized more towards the middle. Normally, when you have a hermaphrodite, one of the genders are suppressed, so one is dominant. But even in homosexuality, normally you'll see the masculine and feminine principles play out, where you'll have one partner who might exude certain qualities more than the other.
Yes. Yeah. Generally, you see a feminine, when it's two of the homosexuality, one of them is going to act more feminine, one of them is going to act more masculine, generally, because that's the way that we generally see it in our society, and maybe because that's an archetype of something. But even if that just shows that with homosexuality or with being asexual or
Hermaphroditic or
hermaphroditic, that you don't, it's not like you escaped that principle, because everything about how you're operating still falls within that principle, down to your electrons, your protons, down to your fundamental particles. You are still seeing this gender. So there is something, divine about having two sides of the same coin manifest at the same time, but it doesn't mean that that individual is escaping, or that mineral or whatever is escaping that principle now. We have to understand that, like I said before, it's more than just biology.
Yes.
It's more than just the physiological standpoint of that creature. There's much more to this principle than that. So I just wanted to make sure that we reiterated that right
exactly. There. And we could even go to momentarily to electricity versus magnetism.
Yeah.
And electromagnetic. And we could consider one masculine and one feminine, because one is projecting and one is receiving or drawing in.
Yeah.
So it's this principle, like he said, we can't escape it because it's natural, it's nature. It is a principle that is, it permeates all of existence.
Yep.
So we're not transcending it, we're embodying it. And then that's why statistics exist.
Yep.
So people will get angry and say, well, why do men think that, aggression is only relative to men? It's like, well, it's not.
No.
But we could arbitrarily categorize it because we have to find a way to put these things in categories.
Yeah, and it's how we've seen it. It's how we've seen aggression throughout the history. It's generally within a male, for whatever reason. I mean, we could look at biochemistry and understand it a bit more. We could look at social pressures and understand it a bit more.
Yes.
But generally, we see it within the male, so that's why we're going to say that. But yeah, it doesn't mean that a female can't be aggressive. I've seen plenty of aggressive females to understand that. But this is more of a, how does it manifest in the physical? How are these different characteristics manifesting in the physical? And when we see them manifesting in the physical, we generally see them in one or the other. Generally.
Yes.
So we don't have
one's
to
more
keep beating
predominant.
on this. Right. Yeah. We're not talking about, hey, when we say that it's a masculine quality, that means females can't have it. No.
Yes.
Please. We're talking generals here.
Yes. And it's accompanied by biochemistry, such as testosterone. And you'll look up Robert Sapolsky, and you'll go to the Huberman podcast that he had with him, and they talk about testosterone, and they talk about aggression, and they talk about hierarchy and status, and muscularity and bone density and all these different things that are accompanied with testosterone. And aggression is not necessarily a byproduct of testosterone, but testosterone, when in the womb, helps to build certain circuitry.
Yeah.
So that if the circuitry is present and then there is this organism is stimulated with a certain amount of testosterone, it can fuel those circuits which have been cultivated by way of testosterone. And it's not like aggression can't be cultivated by a female, not just under the influence of testosterone or testosterone developed circuitry, but also estrogen, because females are very protective of their offspring, and that is also a byproduct of having estrogen fueling certain circuits. So it's a very complex system, an interplay of biochemistry. But for example, we could get into how men have higher levels of muscularity in general. Doesn't mean that females can't.
Right.
But when they do, and they reach a certain threshold where they decrease the amount of fat that they have, that can throw off menstrual cycles.
Yes.
It can inhibit you from procreating because you stop producing ova because your estrogen levels are lower than they should be.
And that's not going to happen with men. So that's why we can look at these things and say, oh, if that happens to a female, that's bad for reproduction, or it makes it impossible or hard. But if a man does it, then it doesn't, or vice versa. So that's how it's an easier way to categorize, and that is a great episode. I highly recommend. We'll have it linked below, the Huberman Robert Sapolsky episode, because what Jordan was touching on was just because you have more testosterone, and this is a misnomer in society that, oh, he's a violent person, he must have a high level of testosterone, and that could be true now if he's a teenager, and when the circuits were being built, testosterone was higher in the blood, so it fueled that circuit, and now it's hard to reprogram it. But it doesn't mean that doesn't mean that testosterone's causing it. Testosterone is just an agent that is fueling those circuits.
Yes.
Right?
And another thing is, you could be watching a football game or whatever your favorite sport is, or a movie where there's action involved, or and these are just kind of stereotypical, but they will increase testosterone.
Right.
You could be watching pornography. That could increase testosterone. You could be engaging in flirtation. That could increase testosterone. You could be competing with other males for status. That could increase testosterone. But it doesn't mean that your competition is aggression based. It could be, and he makes this point in the podcast, where it could be a bunch of monks, because status, the way that status is handed out, is relative to different cultures. So if the status is about aggression, then testosterone will be accompanied with this aggression, because when you get aggressive, you increase testosterone levels. But also, if you're competing by doing good deeds,
right,
and that's how status is given out in this particular culture or society or this region or whatever, you're going to increase testosterone levels, or you could put testosterone in their system and it might boost that behavior of being generous or hugging people. Like if you get higher status because you hug people, or you're seeking nirvana, or you get status from playing cards really well, or who can read the most books. It really just depends on how status is given out. But that's one of those things where, in the animal kingdom, the higher the status, the higher testosterone, the lower the status, or in the hierarchy, the lower the testosterone. And if you infuse testosterone in this primate, then they might become more aggressive because they're a less advanced species. Yeah. And it's fueling those circuits, but it doesn't mean that they're going to ascend through the hierarchy. They might just pester everybody else that's on their level.
Yeah, and that's, when we look at animals, we also have to make a distinction of how those circuits were formed when they were babies. Yes. Right? So we have to understand, and they're also in the wild, where we're in society, and that's important. That is important to understand the intricacies of what we're talking about for masculinity and femininity. That it isn't just, testosterone. When people think about increasing their vibrations, or they think about, the spiritual path, and they're like, and when they think about increasing and not just focusing on the resonant frequencies like we talked about in vibration, that's a similar, you could use that same analogy when you think about more and more testosterone makes me more and more masculine.
Yes.
And more of what I'm supposed to be as a male. And that's not necessarily true. Those are just those traits. So there is this intricate weave that we're trying to put together for you. And you have to remember some of these examples that we've brought up in past episodes and apply them to this principle to really start to understand what the role is. As a male, is it our role just to get more and more testosterone and try to, whatever it is, whether it's out compete the other, whether it's out good deed the other, or is it to understand that, hey, I'm a male and these are my characteristics. That's what's natural to me. I need to work on some of these feminine traits.
Yes, exactly.
As well, I need to try to understand, how can I be more empathetic? How can I be more compassionate? How can I be more loving? Those kind of things, right? Because the goal is to have two sides in one.
Yes, exactly. And that's exactly why there was a polarization, in my opinion, a polarization between the sexes. Mm-hmm. Because, like I said, there are hermaphroditic or androgynous or asexual species. And then you even have hermaphroditic species who also have male versions in their species. And they might not even procreate with them unless, of course, like the nematodes, the worms, they're like an ideal model for experimentation. And the hermaphroditic or female, in this case, the hermaphroditic nematodes will not normally procreate with the males unless they reach an older age where their sperm production is not as efficient. Mm-hmm. So they'll draw them in. And there are like some downsides to doing that, but the upside is increase of biodiversity. Because if you're a hermaphrodite, you can reproduce your own DNA over and over and over. Or if your sperm production is damaged in some way, then they will send out pheromones to draw in the male to procreate with them.
Yes.
And so polarizing males and females, differentiating them, I would say that it's a beautiful thing for our species because both of them are androgynous. A female will naturally, instinctively stimulate the feminine qualities in a man. Mm-hmm. If he's receptive to it, mm-hmm. if his feminine aspect is receptive to it. Mm-hmm. Now, the male gender will do the same thing for the female. Even mm-hmm. though he's androgynous, he's projecting that masculinity onto her, and he's cultivating certain qualities, characteristics, and traits. And if she's receptive to it, then she can alter that sexual dimorphism on a cerebral level. Mm-hmm. And the same for kids. We used to think, oh, well, the female is, the better parent, and, mm-hmm. The kid needs the mother more than she does the father. And that's just not the case. It's just how society made it look. But now we have statistics that say, hey, if you don't have a father, your success rate goes down, your education goes down, you drop out more rapidly or more often, mm-hmm. you have lower grade point averages, you feel less confident. Mm-hmm. There's a whole host of things that, we'll drop some links down below, but there's a whole host of things that can happen if you don't have that fatherly influence, and it's because the child is androgynous at that point, whether it's a masculine or feminine, predominantly polarized biological creature, it's still androgynous, and it needs both of those qualities, characteristics, and traits inherited from both parents. Yeah,
until puberty is, I think, what you're saying, right? Until the child until it starts to have its own levels of testosterone or estrogen in the body, where it is now, even when it does, it will mimic their parent. It'll mimic what they know that individual does. So that's why it's important to have both sides of the equation. Just like math or physics without metaphysics and spirituality, it's important to have both aspects for the child. And it's not that you can't have a homosexual relationship and one of the females acts more manly and one of the males acts more feminine. Then that's, you're still getting, right? That child is still going to get both aspects, right? It needs to see that polarity. It needs to understand that. Now, there's obviously going to be more complex dynamics. This is generalizing it. So when we say a father, we're talking about that masculine influence. When we say a mother, we're talking about the feminine influence. For me, I think a child, as long as it's taken care of and it has both of those, it's better than one of those.
Yes.
Right? So
yes,
like we talked about, there's going to be a scale of how well this child is going to do in the world. And yeah, we definitely thought that men were just providing their seed, and women could take care of kids on their own, and they can, and they do a great job. But it's just always going to be better with both. Now, would a father or a masculine force in that child's life that beats the kid or that is abusive? No, obviously that mother's going to be better off without the child. We're not saying, hey, keep a guy around or keep a woman around regardless.
Exactly. Yes.
We're always talking about best case scenario when we're doing this.
Yes.
And it's a spectrum.
Yes, exactly. And you can have a parent where it could be a woman, but she exudes a bit of masculinity, and whether she naturally has this cultivated or she was born with congenital adrenal hyperplasia where she had elevated levels of androgens, and maybe this is not exactly how it works, but maybe she had some masculine qualities and they were reinforced by society and her family and her environment, and then she ends up being a single mother and she has these qualities, or she just cultivate them on a whim because it's like, well, I need to exude some masculinity to instill some discipline, because maybe she has a son and he doesn't, instinctively he feels like she's inferior because her voice is not as loud or her muscularity is not as high, or she's not, as much as a disciplinarian as the male might have been. Maybe she exudes these qualities and then she raises her son up and he becomes a great man because he had both of those. So it's a wide range of things, but once again, it boils back down to being a spectrum.
Yeah. It sure does.
It's all on a spectrum, and we're not here to stereotype males and females or homosexuals, or if a homosexual couple can be two extremely feminine-based creatures or masculine-based creatures, or male and female, even though they're both females or both males, or transgender. None of that really matters at the end of the day, because it's all on a spectrum.
Right.
And when they have these conversations, there's a problem, because even the people that are proponents of blending these two, whether it's homosexual or transgender, or if it's a heterosexual, normally they have their own stereotypes.
Right.
So it's like you gravitate from one stereotype to another, or you do something such as, well, we don't want females to use testosterone stimulants, steroids in a sport, but we'll let a transgender come and dominate the sport.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, why did they dominate the sport? Because there's certain biological differences in general that males and females have. Yeah. Men tend to have higher levels of muscularity. They tend to be taller. Yeah. They tend to have bigger hands and feet.
Higher bone density.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Heart and lung size and all of these different things in general. So when it comes down to that, and you're playing a sport that requires physical exertion, you're not taking that into account. And we're not knocking the sports. We're just saying that there's a lot of biases that go into transcending the barriers and limitations that patriarchy, false patriarchy, false pseudo-masculinity has instituted in some of these more modern cultures, like such as the one that we live in now in the United States. It was patriarchally driven, and women were suppressed, and then women got women's rights over time, and then you had a wide range, statistically, of women that wanted to emulate male characteristics. So instead of cultivating their feminine and masculine characteristics, some of them became overly masculine, and they started to emulate the behavior of their suppressor. Yep. So, and this is a very touchy subject, because you have women that are like, well, we wanted to be liberated because you guys were, so corny. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, true. I agree with you from a cultural standpoint. In general, that did happen. But at the same time, it didn't happen so that you could emulate these pseudo-masculine traits, because I'm not even going to call them actual masculine traits. Yeah. And then let's push this subject back, that aspect of it, and let's get back into talking about the fundamentals of gender and one being a projector, one being a receiver, even though the feminine is a projector as well and the masculine is a receiver, because if you don't receive, then you can't grow. If you don't project, then you can't create.
Yeah. So cause and effect is a good one here, because you can think of a cause and then an effect, and then that effect becomes a cause, right? And it causes another effect. And that effect is a cause that causes another effect, on and down, just like a domino falling. Originally it was up, it was affected, and now it's the cause that causes the next domino to fall. You could think of masculine and feminine qualities being the same thing, right? A masculine or a will projecting itself onto matter or femininity, and then now that femininity has a masculine aspect that's going to project itself onto maybe the eyes of the observer, and those eyes are now feminine, and then now those eyes become masculine because they're it's the optic nerve that it's sending it's sending a signal down to the brain, which is now feminine because it's receiving, and then now it's having you act upon something, so now the brain becomes masculine. That's what we're talking about.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about, that chain of, you got to look at it from both perspectives, understand how it's feminine and masculine and those traits that are around us in our universe, all the way down to, that was down to like light, right? Acting upon an object and then acting upon an individual, but even down to, you have a negative or an electron and a positive, and they interact with each other. And one of them, technically they're both, the one that's more massive is pulling the other, but they both have this attractive force between them. And if you're on the proton and you see the electron, it's coming towards you. So that electron is going to be what's being acted upon, right? The feminine, and the proton's going to be the masculine. But if you're from the point of view of the electron, it looks like the proton's coming towards you. So you're the masculine and the proton is the feminine. So it's all about perspective. It's all, and we've been talking about this in about every principle, this idea of relativity and perspective. And that's something that is important to keep in mind when we are discussing gender and seeing it in everything around you, because I think there's, for some reason, Mother Nature, and I get that, calling Mother Nature and then Father God, because it's the, God is the will, or God is the action, God is the sperm, and then the mother is what's being acted upon, it's what's receiving. So that makes sense, but there also is, Mother Earth is also very much acting upon us at all times. So it is masculine acting upon us as
and
receivers at all times.
So Father Earth, Mother God.
Yeah, so don't fall into that. And if you have, think about what we're saying. If for you it's like, no, it's very much a masculine force and a feminine earth, and that's what's happening, there is no other aspect, I challenge that. I challenge that, and that's why these principles are so important. And that's why even just looking at the symbol we talked about at the beginning, the yin and yang, is so important, is to see the duality, but then see the oneness, and also see how each piece has the other within it.
Yes, and people will say, and this is in different cultures, but the sun is considered masculine, and then the moon is feminine, or the earth is feminine, and it's like they're both androgynous. We look at the sun as a major projector and its photonic energy and solar flares, and so on. These things, and the electromagnetic force that it produces and the gravitational force, we consider all these things masculine, but it's a recipient of the things around it, as well as other more massive spheres that are out there. Like, there are suns that will devour our sun. There are solar systems that are far greater than ours. There are suns out there that will emit a solar flare and kill everything in our solar system.
Yes.
So that would be considered masculine to us. Or how we talked, you was just talking about this, but the plug, he brought up the plug and the socket, and even how the plug is shaped. And he talked about how, this is earlier, you guys didn't get to see this.
Yeah.
So he talked about how one is like representative of a phallus, and one is representative of a vagina. And, but once again, think about how beautiful this is, that it reverberated in nature and it fractalized even through our creations. How this principle brought us into existence in particular ways where we can polarize it along this spectrum, but then reverberate it into our environment and create things that emulate this principle because it's inescapable.
Yeah.
You cannot escape it.
No.
These microphones are being receptive to the masculine sonic oscillations, the vibratory frequency from our larynx.
Yeah.
And then the cord, just like he talked about the photoreceptors and then the neural impulse and the optic nerve. The cord is now masculine, transmitting the signal to this box that's receiving this information and translating it into data. And then the computer becomes receptive. And it's ongoing. And you can't look at one as masculine and the other as feminine, but you can use this principle to say, okay, all of them are androgynous. This entire process is androgynous, but which end is the masculine and the feminine on, and why do I classify one as masculine arbitrarily versus feminine? And there's a reason for that. So it's not entirely arbitrary.
Yeah.
It's just how do we categorize these things so that we can comprehend it more thoroughly.
That's a great point. And because we see the male giving to the female during the sexual act, I think that really kind of helps solidify through biology how we understand nature. Because we see the man gives to the female and then the female receives, and then if she becomes pregnant, she's carrying and she's giving to that child. So that is why it's masculine as the giver and female as the receiver. I cannot think of any other reason why in a spiritual meaning as to why the masculine is the giver and the female is the receiving, except through understanding the biology around me.
Because we're applying the principle of as above, so below.
Yeah.
We understand everything else because of what we see and how we see it. But that's also the same reason why we have stereotypes.
Exactly.
Because you might see a group of males and or females acting a certain way, and we say those are masculine qualities, those are feminine qualities, and they may not be.
True. Yep.
It may be the inverse. But you have to be very careful when you do that. And this subject has brought upon a lot of arguments and debates because of not being able to comprehend that everything is androgynous. And then you have people who say, well, I am androgynous. Let me go play football with men who are 280, 320, 350, 6'5", 7 foot, and they're running at very high speeds, and it's equivalent of getting hit by a small Toyota car going at 30 miles per hour or something along those lines.
Right.
And it's like, well, if you do that, your ideology might not match reality.
Yeah, and that's important to understand that it just is a certain way. Certain biochemicals create certain structures. Not that one's better or the other. It's just that if you want to then go and play at the highest level with physical individuals that are built a different way, it's just not practical. Now at high school or something where, who knows, you could be the biggest, baddest person and you're female at your high school. But when you get to the top of the top, it just comes down to biochemistry.
Yes.
And that's fine if you want to live your life a certain way, but you have to. That's why it's important to respect an individual's beliefs and respect an individual's ideology.
Yes.
But also know when that is going to be in contradiction with reality, and that's okay. I have things I believe that are contradicted to reality, and I'm allowed to. But it doesn't mean that when I'm at face with that, and it is different than what I think it would be, that's something I also have to face. I also have to understand.
Yes, and it's not like we're not saying, hey, you can't go out and play football with these guys, or the guy do something that the female does in general that she's more physiologically equipped for. Like when women analyze when math problems, a man and a woman can look at the same math problem. In general, they're going to use different brain centers to solve the same problem. So if you was to tell a man, well, sit still longer than a female, well, his nervous system is wired for action. So in general, he's probably going to have more tics, physiological tics, than the female might. Or if you ask him to commit to memorization, or color differentiation, or hearing a child's cry, or knowing what the pheromone of your child smells like when you're smelling 100 other children. Women in studies have shown that they can easily smell their specific kid out of a host of other babies, producing pheromones. Men, not so much.
Exactly.
So it's like, and there are certain jobs that women would naturally be better at, but men are better at in general. I mean, not better at, but men are occupying those positions because of false pseudo-masculinity and false patriarchy. So there's a whole host of things. But the reality is, know what you're getting into and why these differences are the way that they are, and know that there are anomalous scenarios, but the anomalous scenario, at least from this standpoint in evolution, is not the general.
Right.
So in the future, women might have higher levels of muscularity and it not affect procreation.
Very much so.
You know, and greater bone density and all these other things that could allow them to compete in male on female sports, and they would dominate the league or be equals in the league, and then men and vice versa in, you know, whatever the feminine category is.
That's why it's the goal. That's why the goal when you're a male isn't just to become more masculine.
Exactly.
Because you're already naturally built to act in that way. The goal when you're masculine, at least in my mind, through my initiation or through my process, is to try to understand femininity, not to let it overcome me, but to understand it and to act from both sides. So when I want to, rage out or let something like that in when I'm upset, it's important for me to try to talk about things, which usually men don't do, right? There's these things that we just don't do. So, in closing thoughts, it's just like all these examples we're giving, we are men, so we're going to talk from that. But it's both. Both sides have equal in nature, different in degree. So understanding that, and then also understanding that the goal while we're here on Earth, sure, is to do what you're good at naturally, but to also try to, in that situation, what's better? To act with empathy or to act with action, to act with violence? Probably empathy. What's better, to protect or to hide or to be protected? Those kind of things. And then that is how you navigate life. That is how you navigate life.
Yes, and we're natural, in closing thoughts, we're natural teachers of the opposing polarity. So a man may be polarized here as a man for a wide range of reasons, but he's sharpening those skill sets so that when he is polarized again, if the theory of reincarnation is real, if he's polarized again in his next life and he's a female, well, now he's inherited a bit of that masculinity, but now he's polarized to this part of the spectrum where he can cultivate femininity. But as he's sharpening his femininity, he's also cultivating his masculinity. So he's teeter-tottering between the two until he reaches the divine androgen, where he's both equally masculine and feminine, and he's able to display all of the beautiful qualities that come with both male and female. In general, when they're polarized, he becomes this centrality. He becomes this singularity where he becomes like the creator, because the creator, if it is the wave and it's in a superposition, it's both polarities as a singularity. And then it polarizes through the particle wave duality.
Yep, that's exactly it. Yeah, it's if there is conservation of energy, and like we're sticking with the data here, so just understanding that it's important to facilitate both. Just because you are born one or the other, you're born on a spectrum. So understand what is the best quality, what is the best scenario for this situation, and act on it appropriately. And don't let other people's thoughts or don't let peer pressure allow it to weigh on how you act. Don't let other people judge you. Be spiritually selfish. If this is the right thing to do, is to show empathy and your buddies are around and you don't want to, who cares? That what should matter is your walk and how you act and what you're trying to sharpen. And how your finger is masculine and the like button is feminine.
You beat me to it.
I had to finish. I knew you were about to jump in on it.
Oh, man.
I had to jump to a less serious note, but yeah, make sure your finger is down there on that like and that share. We greatly appreciate it. We love you. Peace.
Yeah, don't talk to me, it's off to me. Assault police, the archer screeds. My carpentry is carpeting for all of these. False MCs, a chocolate scene. I'm Charlie Sheen. I darken dreams, the carpet bleeds. My corporate leaves, a scarring your whole face like a Carter scene. I go hard cause the car to me. You ain't hard as he, or the yard hate. Bar hate, it's the Nazarene. Choking line with the main, I'm a martyr king. Yeah, I'm a god, so it's all with me. Pull at your heart, I'm chewing at your arteries. Damn, for the artistry, the artist bleeds. I'm martyring your darling. It's all with me, get lost at sea. Shout the priest, stomp the beast. I do not play, it's often seen. I'm off the boat, got a blade on me, homie, I'm off the go. I don't know, but you niggas put them off the dose, or off the smoke, a cough, a choke, a puke up a coffin toe, with a whole body in it like a mafia joke. Off the coast like mafios. My posse grows like poppy fields. Got a Glock on my side, but it's not the quote. I got the tree, I got the rope, I got the crown, I got the throne. I'm not the Pope, I am the Lord. Goddamn your soul, the gamut grows, the ganja pose, a cannon show. Loud, I'm a blast like my hand and drone. I control the whole globe with a Thanos glove. Jewels on my wrist on the planet dust. You're messing with a god like I am the code. I am the code, the camera froze, they cannot cope. They plan to post, but I'ma kill them all. With the plan I wrote.